Welcome to the fictional courtroom of Misconceptions. Here we take a deep dive into the fine prints of history books and resurrect the dead. Today, in the matter of people versus Prohibition, we will put the effect of the Volstead Act on trial. Did Prohibition change American culture for better or worse? As always, we will listen to the people's opening statement first. Counsel, you may proceed.
18th Amendment, Volstead Act, Prohibition. Or in other words, the worst idea ever. Repealing a constitutional amendment was unthinkable until the Volstead Act came along and said, Here, hold my beer. America declared war against the liquor traffic. You couldn't sell it, you couldn't buy it anymore. Well, I mean legally. I know it sounds crazy, especially in today's perspective.
What?
It's almost like as if the government banned selling meat. Does anyone here have a restaurant? Right. So what would you do if you couldn't serve meat anymore? I mean, think about it. From tomorrow, all meat is out. There are tons of people queuing out the door asking for meat, any meat, but you have to say no. Oh, and there is a bunch of shady butchers by the back door offering the finest steak for cheap, but So how would someone police that you don't actually serve meat? Who could make sure that no restaurant, bistro, cafe or brasserie ever serve a piece of salami again? There is demand and there is supply, but no, it is not allowed anymore. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is my point. I'm not arguing whether you should eat meat or not, whether you should drink alcohol or not. I'm simply saying that banning alcohol would be a pretty foolish idea, wouldn't it? Prohibition was nothing more than a treaty of peace and the fundamental misconception where a part of the country agreed to buy no more liquor and the other to sell none. Prohibition was nothing more than a failed experiment with horrific consequences.
Thank you, counsel. Is the defense ready to deliver their opening statement at this time? Thank you, Your Honor. Here we go again, counsel. Foolish journey, the worst idea ever, horrific consequences. Well, I enjoy a good story when I hear one, but I prefer the ones based on real events. I suspect counsel's aware that it's 2020 and it's not 1920. Life wasn't always the way it is today. The roots of Prohibition reach beyond the abolition of slavery. They go beyond Abraham Lincoln and the women's suffrage. We cannot label Prohibition the worst idea ever without taking a closer look at some of the events and circumstances that led to a ban on liquor traffic. Does anyone suggest that without this crucial milestone, the nation of drunkards could have just sobered up? That the wives and children could have escaped violence and the idea of a happy functioning family could be conjured up without change? Well, make no mistake, there are larger forces at play here. Democracy has always been a work in progress and the part's never been perfect. I believe that banning alcohol at the time was the right thing to do. Prohibition was the only solution to a society yet again facing a historical crossroad. Ladies and gentlemen of this jury, I will present to you today that not only was the 18th Amendment absolutely necessary, but it also laid the foundation to many of the defining characteristics of our modern-day society. Thank you, counsel. Now we shall hear the evidence provided by the people.
Your Honor, I don't want to take up too much of this court's valuable time, but I feel as though I should briefly address the events that led to Prohibition. Counsel is not mistaken for once. The 19th and 20th centuries were different times, and I know the defense would relish the opportunity to lecture me for hours on how we got to Prohibition and why the ban on alcohol was inevitable.
Judge, while counsel's witty comments are always a joy to listen to, I could perhaps make this quick. I don't intend on going all the way back to Reverend Lyman Breach's remarks about the evils of alcohol, and nor do I wish to bring up the Civil War. But I suspect that the council will agree with me that as a part of religious revivalism in America, more and more people were searching for perfection in humans. Therefore, regularly drinking alcohol in excess was certainly considered to be a sin. A force perhaps even more formidable than religion are women. Before we discuss temperance, or the Women's Christian Temperance Union, we must understand that in those days, women had very few legal rights and were almost entirely dependent on their husbands for substance and support. These were dark times. Men would go to the saloon, drink away the mortgage money, get so tanked they couldn't go to work the next day, beat their wives, and abuse their children. How could any woman or child accept to live under these circumstances?
Your Honor, before counsel makes all men out to be wife-beaters, we should perhaps aim to give a wider spectacle to our respected jurors to work with. George Washington, the father of our country, was a distiller himself, and Thomas Jefferson was a wine enthusiast. Alcohol was so deep-rooted within society during the late 19th century that anyone who didn't drink alcohol was regarded as peculiar. The average American over 15 years old consumed nearly 7 gallons or nearly 27 liters of pure alcohol a year.
What an achievement. That's 3 times of today's alcohol consumption.
Counsel, we're not going to be interrupting each other today, are we?
Absolutely not, Your Honor.
Thank you, Judge. However painful it is to hear, we shall be honest about the decisive forces that drove this country dry on paper for 13 years. By 1880, America was heavily industrialized and gave hope to millions from other parts of the world, especially Europeans, mostly German and Irish. Many individuals of the Prohibition movement associated the crime and morally corrupt behavior of American cities with their large immigrant populations. In the words of John Greenspan, organizing around alcohol is in some ways a politically correct way to go after other immigrants. It is not entirely polite to say, I want to get all the Catholics out of the country, but it is very polite to say, alcohol is ruining society. Your Honor, we must also address the abolition movement prior to and following the 13th Amendment. It is undeniable that abolitionists played a significant role in sidelining some other very viable solutions to tackling the alcohol issue. Surely the defense would agree with me that regulation would have been a far better solution to saloons and excessive drinking than an all-out ban on the liquor traffic. But if anyone was to disagree, just have a look at the war on drugs. How's that working out?
Your Honor, counsel's narrow-minded approach is precisely what divides us. I never said that prohibition was the best approach, but I do say that it was inevitable. According to the people, it was abolitionists and immigrants who are responsible for prohibition. Never mind 140 years of temperance movement in America and the worldwide prohibition movement preceding the Volstead Act. Canada, Norway, Finland, just to name a few, were all years ahead of the United States when it came to a ban on liquor traffic. Oh, and the Women's Christian Temperance Union was not formed out of boredom, counsel. We must recognize the honest and brave battle that women fought against abuse and injustice from the 18th century all the way to prohibition and beyond.
Your Honor, I think this courtroom would benefit from hearing a brave and honest woman's story. The people called their first witness, Carrie A. Nation, to take the stand.
State your name for the record.
Carrie Amelia Nation.
You swear or affirm that any testimony you make will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Mrs. Nation, good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. You are possibly the most well-known member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union.
If you say so.
Oh, I do. Could you tell the jury what the WCTU stands for?
You don't know?
No, I do know, Mrs. Nation, but I think the jury would like to hear.
To wage war on the destroyer of men's souls.
Could you give us a simple and clear explanation, please?
The Women's Christian Temperance Union was the largest and most influential women's organization in the world by 1890. Our purpose was to rid society and families of the influence of alcohol, the destroyer of men's souls, and we also campaigned for labor laws, prison reform, and women's suffrage, of course. Happy now?
Permission to treat the witness as hostile, Your Honor.
Granted.
Thank you, Judge. Mrs. Nation, I believe you started a local branch of the WCTU at Medicine Lodge, Kansas, right? I'd like to talk about the brave and honest battle against the destroyer of men's souls, okay?
Go on then.
Great. I promise to be brief. You had a dream in which God told you to go to Kiowa, and I quote you here, "Take something in your hands and throw at these places in Kiowa and smash them," right? So you went to Kiowa, picked up some rocks, walked into a saloon and said, "Man, I have come to save you from a drunkard's fate." Then you smashed up the saloon. then smashed up 2 more, and didn't you declare the following? I am a bulldog running along at the feet of Jesus, barking at what he doesn't like.
Oh yes.
Right. After Kiowa, I believe your next destination was Wichita, where you were arrested for defacing property. Isn't it true that you were smashing up the long curving bar of the Cary Hotel when a private eye arrived and tried to arrest you for defacing property? You responded, defacing? I'm destroying.
Your Honor, I think we get the picture. I suspect you're going to make a point, counsel.
I'm almost there, Your Honor.
Proceed.
Mrs. Nation, isn't it true that after your 5th saloon you resorted to using a hatchet, since your second husband David suggested that you could do more damage with that?
That was the most sensible thing he said since I married him.
So you proceeded to carry out these hatchetations, as you call them, while now attacking pharmacies too. You became a feared phenomenon, invaded the chambers of the governor of Kansas, and were also arrested more than 30 times, correct? Mrs. Nation, were you ever diagnosed with any mental problems?
Never.
But your mother did believe that she was the Queen of England, and your daughter Charlene was committed to the Texas State Lunatic Asylum in 1905. Was she not?
How dare you, you nicotine-soaked whiskey-greased, red-eyed devil, you!
Thank you, Mrs. Nation. No further questions, Your Honor.
Would the defense like to cross-examine the witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Mrs. Nation, good afternoon. You are a dangerous and violent criminal, are you not?
Nay.
But Mrs. Nation, you can't just go around smashing up all this liquor and frightening the soul out of these innocent, law-abiding citizens. Unless the liquor is not supposed to be there in the first place, and these law-abiding citizens are committing a crime, in fact.
Finally, someone with some sense.
It appears that counsel may have forgotten to inform this court of the 1881 Kansas constitutional amendment. Mrs. Nation, Kansas was the first state to go dry, was it not?
Aye.
So these saloons you smashed up were not supposed to have any alcohol, right?
Nay.
Well, but Mrs. Nation, what did you do wrong? Did you perhaps attack some of these people while hatchetating?
Never.
Well, did anyone attack you?
More than once. I had bartenders run towards me shooting holes in the ceiling, then wrenching hatchets out of my hands.
Goodness me, Mrs. Nation. What did you do?
I waited till they went out back, then I got another hatchet.
Granted, Mrs. Nation, your methods are unconventional, but for the life of me, I don't know what you've done wrong beyond causing a little damage to paintings and furniture.
Objection, Your Honor. Ambiguous, inflammatory, argumentative.
Sustained.
Right. Mrs. Nation, I believe you were married twice, and your first marriage was rather short-lived, correct?
I should have never married that fool. He was drunk at the ceremony and spent more time at the Masonic Lodge than at home. I was pregnant and helpless with a drunken husband and no means of support.
Well, you've done the right thing, and you left him. Just as you've done the brave thing and stood up and fought for what you thought was right. Mrs. Nation, whatever your motive was to begin your crusade against alcohol, you certainly opened the door for hundreds of thousands of women to join you, did you not?
Someone had to save this man from a drunkard's fate. I believe in the rule of law. It is not possible to make a bad law. If it's bad, it's not a law.
Well, Mrs. Nation, it ought to be said that beyond the famous hatchetations, you were also a well-known temperance lecturer and conducted many women's marches in opposition to saloons. I'm not sure if you'll agree with me, but some say that you alone have done more to achieve prohibition than the whole of the temperance movement.
I always wanted to do what God tells me to do. I am commanded to cry aloud about sin and not to whisper about it.
Well, you've certainly done more than whispered. Thank you very much, Mrs. Nation. No further questions, Your Honor.
Your Honor, Carrie Nation was not the only radical who believed that the ends justify the means. Even before she began agitating most of Kansas, the Anti-Saloon League was formed in 1893 Oberlin, Ohio. This group, like the WCTU, also believed in temperance and lobbied for prohibition. The ESL's influence grew rapidly, and by 1895 it became the most powerful prohibition lobby in America. These guys were smart. They didn't get bogged down with all kinds of ideologies. Just prohibition. Prohibition now, and prohibition at all costs. Let me introduce Wayne Wheeler, a rather palatable and conventional character. Young Wayne was injured on the family farm as a boy by a drunken laborer, while another drunk frightened his mother and sisters too. Who can blame him for his grudge against alcohol?
Judge, I think I know where this is going. Wayne Wheeler, another fanatic who forced the nation to go dry. If counsel didn't have tunnel vision, he could perhaps take a more objective view. Mr. Wheeler joined the ASL in 1894 because he was inspired by the organization's idealism and truly believed in its cause. He was intelligent, smart, ambitious, and devoted his life to the Anti-Saloon League. Wayne Wheeler was an innovator in mass media who knew how to get Washington's attention. Without his invention of pressure politics, aka Wheelerism, the 18th Amendment would have never been conceived, the Volstead Act would have never been drafted, nor Prohibition enacted.
Oh, what a tragedy that would have been, Your Honor. I'm glad counsel brought up Wheelerism. Let me explain what that means. First, use the media to gain influence. Second, use supporters for personal gain. Third, discard all integrity, ally with the KKK if necessary, while bullying, blackmailing and threatening those who stand in your way. Didn't he say himself, "I don't care how a man drinks. I care how he votes and how he prays"?
Judge, according to counsel, Mr. Wheeler was a gangster, terrorizing half of Washington. What's next, counsel? That he didn't support the federal income tax bill, or that he wanted to be crowned the King of England? I mean, wasn't he a major player in getting the 16th Amendment through? Your Honor, Wayne Wheeler and the ASL recognized the likely economic impact of banning alcohol and therefore heavily supported the 16th Amendment. If the nation was to go dry without the federal income tax bill, Uncle Sam would have surrendered $200 million worth of liquor-generated tax revenue. Americans were drinking more and more, and by 1913, beer production jumped 60%, and the volume of tax-paid spirits grew over 65%. No one forced prohibition, things were changing. While one part of the country was drinking more and more, the other tolerated it less and less. It didn't take long for business and politics to catch on and join the crusade. Even the most powerful man in America supported prohibition. Your Honor, the defense is prepared to call its first witness, Warren G. Hardin, to take the stand.
State your name for the record, please.
Warren Gamaliel Hardin.
Do you swear or affirm that any testimony you make will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. President, good afternoon.
Glad to be here.
You were first elected to the US Senate during the First World War.
Yes, I was the Senator of Ohio until I was elected president in 1921.
So you cast many important votes, from temporary wartime prohibition to the women's right to vote, all the way to the Volstead Act.
I proudly voted for women, and I proudly voted dry.
Mr. President, is there any way that you could walk the jury through of the legislative side of getting to a ban on liquor traffic by constitutional amendments, just as briefly as possible?
Sure. Congress proposed the 18th Amendment in 1917, which was ratified by 2/3 of the states by January 1990. Judiciary Chairman Andrew Volstead introduced the National Prohibition Act in May 1919, which passed the House in July.
Is the National Prohibition Act also known as the Volstead Act?
That's right. My predecessor, President Woodrow Wilson, vetoed the bill on October 27, 1919, but we voted to override his veto on the next day. And as a result, Prohibition came into force at 1 second past midnight on January 17, 1920.
America was finally dry.
At last.
Has your position ever changed regarding the prohibition movement? Have you always supported it?
From day one, I wanted to remove lawless drinking as a menace to the Republic itself. I wanted the nation as dry as the sunburned and whitened bones around the desert waterhole.
How important was prohibition to you, Mr. President?
Quite. Drinking was a moral issue, second only in importance to the moral issue of the abolition of slavery. Once the amendment passed, and I voted for it to pass, the enforcement of the 18th Amendment was the next key issue. The country and the nation will not permit the law of the land to be made a byword. There must be no issue in this land paramount to that of the enforcement of this law.
Could you tell us any immediate results of the enforcement of the Volstead Act under your presidency?
How much time do you have? Finally, debts were being promptly paid, Men took wages home instead of wasting them in saloons. Domestic violence complaints fell significantly. Families were better clothed, better fed, and money even made it into the savings bank. Liquor consumption dropped to about 30% of pre-prohibition levels, which was a historic low point. And we saw a decline in alcohol-related illnesses and deaths too.
A complete and utter success.
Objection, Your Honor. Misleading.
Sustained.
Let me rephrase, Your Honor. Did you interpret these initial results as positive or negative?
Positive, of course.
Mr. President, is it fair to say that the Volstead Act was delivering results?
Great results.
Did you have any reason to think it might fail?
Why would it fail? It's what the nation wanted. In other generation, I believe that liquor will have disappeared not merely from our politics, but from man as well.
Thank you, Mr. President. No further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, Judge. Mr. President, what an honor. Thank you for being here today.
Hello.
I want to assure you have nothing to fear. We are not here to discuss the Teapot Dome scandal.
I don't know what you're talking about.
Sure. You know, there's this quote I live by, Mr. President. I'd like you to hear it. Honesty is the great essential. It exalts the individual citizenship and, without honesty, no man deserves the confidence of the people in private pursuit or in public office. Warren G. Harding.
Great quote.
So, why did you override that Wilson veto again? Because you supported prohibition, or because you actually opposed the amendment, but political interest and your friends at the ASL made you swallow your true opinion and made you vote dry?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative, ambiguous, hearsay.
Sustained. You don't need to answer, Mr. President.
Here's a different question then. Do you drink, Mr. President?
No, I do not.
I imagine you remember Elizabeth Jeffrey, the chief housekeeper of your White House. Didn't she write that you are a big eater and like scotch and soda?
I don't know what she wrote.
Let's talk about your friend Harry M. Doherty. First your political manager, later your attorney general throughout your presidency.
I know who he is.
Well, of course you know who he is. You may also know he was implicated in alcohol corruption, but I'm sure that stocking up the yellow oval with confiscated booze had nothing to do with it.
Objection, Judge. Counsel's supposed to be asking questions, not telling a story.
Overruled. I advise the people to get to the point.
Right away, Your Honor. President Harding, there is someone else we ought to talk about. You remember Teddy Roosevelt's eldest daughter, Alice Longworth? Did you know she's been up in the yellow oval room herself and gave the following description? The air was heavy with tobacco smoke, cards and poker chips ready at hand, a general atmosphere of waistcoat unbuttoned, feet on the desk, and a spittoon alongside trays of every imaginable brand of whiskey. So let me get this straight, Mr. President. During the day, you present yourself as some kind of a dry hero, advocating prohibition and preach the importance of enforcement. But at night, you turn the White House into a saloon, play poker with your friends while your wife, the Duchess, mixes bootleg cocktails. Well, that is leading by example, Mr. President, isn't it?
Your Honor, this is outrageous. Objection.
Is the outrage not the other hypocrisy, Your Honor?
Order! Counsel, we do not berate the witness in this court whether you're right or wrong.
Apologies, Your Honor. I'm on the last question. Mr. President, I understand that you are quite a ladies' man, and once you were even caught in the Oval Office anteroom by a wife amidst adultery, but you had the perfect excuse. It's a good thing that I'm not a woman. I would always be pregnant. I can't say no. Oh, at another one of these White House parties, it seems like you had a drunken orgy. And you even had a prostitute dancing on a table who slipped and hit her head. She sadly died of the injury. My question is this, Mr. President. Were you drunk on both occasions or just the orgy?
Objection.
Withdrawn. Thank you, Mr. President. No further questions.